So welcome everyone to the 5th segment of our customer education series. It's our last segment, so we're excited to bring it all home. I'll hand it over to Michael, who's having the conversation with Samir. And Michael, why don't you take it away?
Fantastic, thanks, Mark. Yeah, best for last, right? It's the end. Look, if we look at where we've been with this conversation and the series and the content around it. In fact, let's start with kind of a quick recap of how this all works. The idea was to break down what we need to do in order to think about and act on this mindset of assumed breach. We have had over the last 5 or 6 weeks a couple new examples that keep it fresh in our head that it's not enough to just say, oh no, my prevention will fix everything. There's a blend that we need, and we realize that, but sometimes crossing that gap is a little bit more challenging. So what we designed was a 5-part series that uses content, conversation, and the opportunity for reflection. So there's ultimately, at the conclusion of this week, there will be 15 different ways to take a look at this, including the transcripts. And it's a very fast way, spread out over a period of weeks, to engage in these types of conversations. And so I'm really looking forward to what we're going to bring up today. What we've done so far, kind of get to where we are today. In the first part of the series, we looked at the fact that the world's changed. Our attackers have changed. Their techniques have shifted and changed. Our environments have changed, and that's okay. In fact, that's ultimately, as this series progressed, it turned out to be this fantastic turning point to really change that conversation and to improve those dialogues in our organizations. In the second part of the series, we got deep then into what it takes to change, what we need to consider, the questions we need to ask, but not just ask, but answer, and how to answer them, how to measure them, how to gather that evidence and look at it in a financial light. And as I've said a couple times already, but what really kind of stuck with me was when you start calculating things like we see routinely with an 80% false positive rate that's costing you $500,000 a year, it doesn't take a lot to figure out that maybe there are some changes that need to get made. Now, sometimes those changes mean we need to go in and have some challenging conversations with our executives, with the board, or we need to go ask for more money. We need to make allocation changes. And in the third part of the series, Fran Dram has joined us. And Fran, very similar to Samir and the other guests that we've had with us, real world experience, real practical stuff here. And as a board member, as a chairman of the board, as a former CIO, Fran really laid it out that it's not a gap. We got to stop treating it that way. It's an opportunity to go have this conversation. Things changed. It's not that we missed. It's that the things have changed. And man, the stuff he laid out was just absolutely solid. So then last week we got with Brian Foster, the CTO of Damballa. We got deep into the details of just machine learning, how it works, how machine learning works with the data, and what we need. And the big takeaway I got out of that conversation was, and I hadn't thought about this previously, is that alerts are the enemy of detection, because ultimately alerts just create more work. And so it was a really good way to think about objective criteria to take a look at what you're doing, how your detection solutions work, or what people are saying, because there is no silver bullet. There's no one way to do. So the goal today is to take a look at what we get when we act, and then how to do it. Because part of the series was intended to figure out what we needed to talk about and to make sure that we had a level playing field and we could all feel comfortable talking about something in a consistent fashion, and that we can bring this and have this conversation with other people. But of course, if we don't act on it, if we ourselves don't lead that way, then we're leaving a lot of opportunity behind. And so the goal here is to advance that forward. So let me just set this up, and then we'll introduce Samir, and we'll get down to sharing a lot of what he's got to bring to it, which is, frankly, pretty exciting. So once you assume breach, that's when the work begins, because it means there's a change. It's a shift in our mindset. Shift in the mindset typically denotes that we're going to change something in our behavior patterns and our actions, maybe just in our thinking broader than the assuming the breach. So what it means then is we got to start to say, all right, what works? What do I need to change? Oh, and by the way, time marches on, so you've got to keep doing what you're doing. The real goal that we're looking at then is, so how do we bring detection and response into balance? The thing here is we're not saying prevention's bad or prevention doesn't work. It does. What we're starting to ask, though, are sharper questions. Is your prevention working the way that you expected? Are you getting the return on it? Is it providing you the value that you sought? So when we say, oh, yeah, I need more detection. Oh, we need better response. Yes. Actually, Yes, with a caveat. What you really want is better detection. It's more accurate. You want confidence. You want to know that you're getting a confirmation as opposed to an alert. You want to know that if something signals you to act, it's time to act. And then you want to get some understanding of where you should focus first. We can't protect everything. We can't protect it all. We can't do it all. And we don't have to if we do the right things. And so that's really what we're looking at, is how do we improve our capabilities as we work through this, as we go forward. What do we do? The other thing to start to take a look at is we've had now 20, 30 years of really looking at how we developed out protocols and where we might have some opportunities for improvement. We've looked at the ways of extensibility. We've looked at predictions that we've made, or the way that we've locked ourselves into things. And so what this means is that we don't have to look at a specific slice right now. There's not a specific technology or specific anything. What we want to do is this is an opportunity as we're making that shift to step back and think a little bit more broadly and say, okay, how does this help me today? How will this help me tomorrow? And can I get this to help me in more than one way? Yes, I want detection. Does it help with response? Does it improve my prevention? Does it do something more? And frankly, the more things it can do, as long as it doesn't take a lot of extra time from you, the better off, the stronger that has a tendency to be. So what do we do? Well, the thing that I've looked at over years when we think about how we galvanize action is that it helps if we put some planning into it. So hopefully, as you get a chance today, you can jot down some ideas and you can figure out some pieces that you can incorporate that work for you. You can maybe come up with some stuff on your own. You can go back over the series. I'm going to take some notes and put those into the reflection that I share later part of this week. But here's a quick way to think about it. There should be something, right? So today is Tuesday, or whatever day you're listening to this. There's something you can do in the next 24 hours. Something that you can do is very inward facing. There's no risk. You're not exposing yourself. You're not. But what you want to do is start looking at the information that we're going to share today, as well as the information we've currently shared. That should galvanize a little bit of action for you. It should give you a little bit of momentum and help you guide what should happen next week. Now, I know we're coming up on a holiday across most of the world. This is actually, oddly, a great time to go have these conversations. People are a little bit more relaxed. I mean, obviously, if they're rushing to hit a deadline, well, then you might give them a little bit of space. But the idea is between now and let's even say the end of the year, there are questions you can have where you start to socialize this outward. You start to engage people. You can ask better questions. You can collect better evidence. There's a lot of pieces to it. And then over the course of the next month, what are you going to do that actually gets you what you need in order to progress where you want to be? And that's more or less what we're going to get a chance to talk about today. Samir is going to join us, and we're going to talk about what it takes to actually be successful, how to do that, why to do that. He's got some ideas I can't wait to share because it got me kind of excited when we were preparing for this. So as we go through this today, if you've got questions, feel free to ask the questions. We're not going to do poll questions today, but if you've got experiences that you want to share, something that's worked, that'd be great. We'll amplify that. We'll share that with other people. If you've got questions about how to make something we talk about work, I'd be thrilled and happy to amplify that. So with that said, we're going to welcome Samir Balotra with us. Samir has got remarkable experience, and he's got the kind of experience like when a president calls on you and says, okay, I need you to handle this. And so when we talk about what does it take to put a plan of action together, what do you need to think about? How are you going to do this in the best possible way? We're talking to probably one of the best people in the country, at least in the U.S., that's done this on a presidential level. But he's also done this across a number of sectors. He's worked with a number of companies. So his experience, what I love about it is it's real. So Samir, thanks for taking time out of your day to share with us, and I'm excited that you're here.
I'm here, Michael. Sorry about that.
Right.
Thanks
no
everyone
worries.
for being here. I look forward to the conversation.
Part of what we're trying to do is be proactive. We're trying to say, yeah, you might get breached, or you might not get breached, but the reality of it now is you're probably more likely to get breached than you're not. So when we start talking about changing and circling back and thinking about attackers and stuff, I mean, you've clearly had exposure to attackers that are pretty highly motivated and possibly pretty sophisticated. Do we all need to worry about that? And how do you see this change getting started with those? What are our options? What do we need to think about as we're getting ready to get going here?
Yeah, sure. So just to set the landscape here, as Michael mentioned, I worked in the government for about 10 years in various positions in the intelligence business, the U.S. Senate, and then the White House, as Michael mentioned, as one of President Obama's top cybersecurity people. And man, on my watch in the White House, we saw a lot of breaches happen. Now you read about it every day. On my watch, we had NASDAQ, if you guys remember that a few years ago. We had major national labs with some of our most sensitive technology. We had military networks get hit, and the Defense Department had to deal with that. It was really bad. And I'll tell you, I was thinking back then there were two ways that this could play out. One way is you wait till you get breached, and then the executives pay attention, and you build a plan and get funding and put your defenses in place. The second option, obviously what we were there for, is to try to get ahead of that, right? Build an approach, put a layered defense in place, get funding, get the seniors' attention before a breach. I'll tell you, we didn't have a lot of great examples of that. I wished that we could have gotten ahead of these problems more often, but more of the time we got hit really hard and then scrambled to respond.
It's an interesting point because I think a lot of times, especially when you say, you support the president, you work with the White House, it's that you're looking at the attacks that are just happening at the White House, but it seems like your purview is actually a lot bigger as you look at this. So what galvanized the action for you? I mean, was there a breach that you can remember where it was like, Samir, this can't happen again. What do you need? Or did you have to kind of bring stuff to people and say, guys, this is happening. I got to go do something? Like, what was that dynamic like?
Yeah, it's a great point. So, there were many predecessors that came before me who helped bring the cybersecurity topic into the light, right? So there have been about 10 years of White House staff and other very capable security leaders in the government raising this issue. So it wasn't a total surprise to people. When President Obama came in, as you recall, a very internet-savvy president, right? Used a BlackBerry and all, and he really wanted to make cybersecurity a priority. So the White House was primed to be ready to deal with these things. But I'll tell you, the severity of the attacks that happened, the severity of the attacks really surprised us. But I mentioned a few. That NASDAQ thing that happened a few years ago, right? And I can't get into all the details. Really got people's attention at the highest levels. It's obviously a critical part of our financial infrastructure here in the U.S. And then the military networks. As the military and their surrounding companies started getting hit hard, I think you read a bit about that, people really, really got worried, right? Compromising the ability of the Defense Department to do what they need to do to protect us got everyone's attention. Those are the things that really took it to the next level. But like I say, I wish we had been ahead of some of these things and gotten the executives' attention at a higher level earlier, put more funding into defense earlier, done a better job earlier.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. So let's actually talk about that then, that balance between detection and response. We're kind of seeing, I mean, there have been some breaches even in the last couple of weeks that have a lot of people looking at it going, well, you couldn't have prevented that. I think time will settle out what can or can't be prevented. I guess with a comfortable armchair, everything is preventable. So when you're looking at it and you're looking at prevention versus detection and response, how did that come down for you? What are the things that we need to think about there? Do we need more of something, less of something? Give us a framework to think about this differently.
Yeah, sure. So I think just for context and the things you're talking about, this year we saw Home Depot, Target, JP Morgan Chase get hit really hard, right? Sony, of course, is in the news today. Many more unpublished attacks. My feeling is you can never have perfect defense. That's just not possible. But you want to increase the cost on the bad guys, right? You've got to put smart defenses in place, have smart human operators in those defenses. It's a risk management approach to try to put the highest cost on the bad guys and give yourself the best shot of surviving. So to me, it's not good enough just to say, oh, the bad guys are so capable, we'll never win, and give up. No, you need to step in and do the best you can. That's the job of the defenders. And the stakes are higher, right? In the old days, the press would come out, people would freak out. But now you're seeing CEOs getting fired. You're seeing board of directors receiving dozens of lawsuits, major liability in the courts, huge cleanup costs, brand names really suffering. So the costs are high. So, to answer your question, you need to do both. I think you need to have a prevention system in place, but you're going to get hit. It's pretty clear. And you also need to have a better response system in place. And for me, that's all about speed. How quickly can you detect exactly what's happened to you, and how quickly can you respond?
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. The stakes certainly feel higher, and I suspect most people would agree that the stakes are higher. And so I think what's interesting then is it also changes too. We've got to know what we're putting in, right? I mean, it can't just be, well, everyone else says I should have X, so I put in X. Not really sure what it does. Not really sure what I'm protecting. I mean, it seems too like that speed means if you can detect something faster, you've got a chance of disrupting it. Did you rely on those types of things? I mean, is that something that, I mean, obviously part of what we're looking at is if you rely on prevention only, when something bypasses it, you're going to get caught off guard. So the question then is, I guess, what do we need to think about when it comes to that detection? And you talked a little bit before about the difference between quality and quantity, knowing about potential problems versus actual problems. How do you see that fitting into that balance?
Yeah, sure. I think you're right on. I think today we have a lot of investment in prevention and not enough investment in response, detection and response. That doesn't mean we need less prevention. I think we just need more detection and response. And there's another problem in the prevention era, which you mentioned here and Brian mentioned earlier. There's just a lot of alerts. I like to say I like quality over quantity, like you mentioned. Right now, I think prevention is sometimes getting into the area of quantity. A lot of chatter, reams of data, lots of alerts and pings, tons of information coming into a security ops center. It's a little bit of a flood, a little bit of a nightmare for security ops guys who have to sort through it all. So burgeoning business in security analytics, right, to try to make sense of it. But you need to augment that with good intelligence, better signal-to-noise ratio. Instead of just a flood of noise, some higher precision, higher accuracy signals that you can really count on that tell you when you have a problem.
Yeah, you and I were chatting about this offline, and I think it's an interesting point. And it's not a shot at anybody, but what we've seen now with some of these high-profile breaches is after the breach, the company announces they've brought in some expert or some team, and they're going to do an analysis, and they're going to get to the bottom of what happened. And invariably, at least in the last year or so, the finding comes out, they had tons of alerts, and they missed tons of signals. But, you said something to me I thought was really interesting, which is, but they got luxury of time. I mean, at that point, you're paying a premium dollar for some of the best expertise in the world, and if they say to you, I'm going to need months to get through this, they've got that. Whereas your SOC guys or your team on that front line, they probably had seconds. And that's a big distinction that I think we're a little slow sometimes to point out. Do you agree?
Yeah, I agree completely. Some people say, I talk about signal to noise and intelligence, and they say, is that possible? Can we get high quality information? And I say, yes, the proof is there for the reason you just mentioned, Michael. When the forensics guys come in who are very capable, but have that luxury of time and expertise, they often find out exactly what happened, right? How people got in, what they stole, what the damage is, sometimes who did it. But it takes them a lot of time and kind of manual human labor to put that together. But what that tells you is the data is there, right? You just need to try to get that faster. So I think the goal is to automate that kind of high-quality forensics work and get it faster. I think the goal is faster quality, of course, at low cost.
and we're talking about security intelligence, not fast food, but it's the same kind of thing, though, right? We want high quality. It needs to be faster. It needs to support our actions. So let's talk about that. When we talk about the modern benefit, because I want to get into some of these things in terms of where we can spend our time. But you've got some stories. Well, I'm sure you've got a ton of stories. But I was kind of hoping you might be able to share a story or two with us where we get to talk about the value of.
So I think what Michael was asking me to talk about was an example. So, all the best examples it's hard for me to talk about all the details, right, Mark? But it is possible for me to kind of relay some general learnings about intelligence. So as you all probably know, for the audience out there, the president gets a morning intelligence briefing. I think there's a TV show about that coming out now. And this intelligence briefing is not a case for more money or a recommendation about what defenses to put in place. It's just neutral, high-quality information, right? Precise, accurate information about the state of things. So the president can then separately decide what he wants to do. I think that this kind of, intelligence is a key topic we should talk about. So let's get into it. Do we need intelligence? Is it really useful? Well, absolutely. When you don't have intelligence about who's coming to get you and where you're weak, you've got to defend a huge attack surface, right? Stating the obvious. So an analogy would be air defense, right? Terrorists trying to steal planes and crash into things. If you don't know where they're going to attack and how they're going to do it, you got to protect everything, which means everyone has to take their shoes off at the airport because you're not sure where the attacks are coming. If you do have good intelligence, there's an attack coming at this city or this facility, then you can focus your defenses there and not waste your time and attention and everyone else's time and attention everywhere else, right? So what I find today in cyber is there's a similar issue where because we don't have good intelligence, we often need to protect everything, including a lot of the wrong things, assets that are not that important, or channels of entry that are not being used by attackers. And obviously the goal is to protect the right things and get those insights that you need so you know where to focus. So that's what intelligence is for.
I love this as a thought. So something that's kind of coming to me, and I'm curious your take on it. In the example that you gave then, right, we have people that are dedicated to an intelligence field. There's a practice to it, and there's human intelligence, and there's cyber intelligence, and there's signals intelligence, and there's all sorts of other stuff that we use. So are we getting to the place then where we need to think about that inside of our organizations, that we need a person or a team that's dedicated to looking at this stuff and figuring out, hey, are we protecting the right things? Are we protecting the wrong things? Here's how it fits. I mean, is that a capability that we need to think about developing? How do you see this unfolding for us?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's usually, it's an internal risk management team. And the best companies and organizations that are good at cyber defense absolutely do this, Michael. They start with a risk assessment of what are the most important assets, right? What are the channels of entry for adversaries? And they assess the value of each of those assets and channels, right? And they combine all that to come up with a risk score. They use that risk measurement to decide where and how to put their defensive dollars. That's absolutely the way to go. Some of these organizations also have intelligence functions, just like the government, where humans and technology work together to find out what the bad guys are trying to do to them, so they can, again, focus their resources on the actual threats and actual vulnerabilities that are out there. I mean, that is a very mature and excellent way to do defense. Not all organizations have gotten to that point yet, but that is where we're headed.
What would you see as a baby step? So when somebody's looking at that, because that sounds delightful. And to be fair, I haven't really come across a lot of companies that are at that higher level of maturity where they can tell you these are our assets, these are the channels of attack, these are the scores that we have. I mean, I'm familiar with the concepts, and I know people have executed on parts of them. I know that I'm working with companies that are spinning up their intelligence functions. What's the stepping stone? What do they need to start thinking about now to get them into that position? Yeah,
sure. I think the limiting factor often for the companies you're talking about that haven't quite gotten there, it's just trained people. They don't have enough highly qualified cybersecurity experts. There aren't that many of us. And what we need to do is, instead of trying to find 10 times more people, because that's a big challenge, is give better technology tools to the few people you have that are high quality. That's what I think. So it gets back to our point about automation, right? Find automated ways, better technology ways to develop that intelligence that you need, so you have high confidence about where your weaknesses are, where you've been hit, and let those few humans take action more quickly. So I think automation is the first step. Now today, if you go to a security ops center, in a major bank, a lot of parts of this are automated, but there's a lot that requires human intervention, right? Alerts come in, a case is made, and the human has to study it and investigate and figure out what to do. There's too few people who are expert at this. It's pretty slow. It's definitely costly. I think we want better automation and better quality alerts so that you have, like I said, better precision, better accuracy intelligence about where your problems actually are, so that your few humans can go after it.
It feels almost like, and maybe this isn't the right example, but if we look at the way that you talked about the financial services, and we look at credit card monitoring these days, there are people who get notified within seconds. In fact, we've seen, I always think this is interesting, we've seen banks hold it out as a benefit that we'll send you to an app. We'll send you an alert, and you can respond right from your phone, yes or no. And so, it almost feels like what you're suggesting there is that they're spending the time and the effort to build systems where if it says, hey, we think this is fraudulent, their level of confidence that it's actually fraudulent is high enough that they'll either take action to decline it or otherwise alert somebody or something to that effect. Is that kind of the direction that we need to think about? And do you think that's a good example to point to, or are there some pitfalls there that we want to kind of steer clear of?
Yeah, I have mixed feelings about that example. So you're right. That shows that there's good technology, analytical technology in place that can detect fraudulent activity. But think of what the automated action is here, right? In the worst case, they're blocking an attempted credit card transaction, right? You're at Best Buy trying to buy a new TV and you get blocked and you have to wait for this alert to come in or phone call to get made. It's low stakes, right? If they screw up, it's a false positive, you just have to make a phone call, right? A credit card transaction gets delayed. The reality in big companies, though, we're seeing, attacks, cyber attacks on a much different scale here, right? What's at stake is much, much more than a single credit card transaction. So, for example, if the op center gets intelligence that leads them to believe a certain machine is infected, right? Maybe it's beaconing in a strange way, part of a botnet. Well, the action there would be probably to quarantine that machine and investigate what happened, right? See if other machines are hidden, go from there. Well, that machine could be a really important part of that customer network, right? It might be controlling trading, for the stock market. It might be controlling water pipelines, power grid ops. I can go on and on. If you automatically quarantine that machine based on a piece of intelligence and you're wrong, right, you've turned off the company's operations. Cost them a lot of money, possibly a lot worse. So in big companies, the stakes are a lot higher, right? You need to have just really high quality intelligence before you're going to quarantine an important machine from your network, right? That's why today humans are in the loop most of the time, because they don't want false positives from the technology to kill them. So again, you need more confidence when you get some intelligence about a problem in order to do that automation that we're trying to get to.
Well, yeah, and I mean, that goes back to some of what we've talked about a little bit. We've got people that we've talked to that routinely get an 80% false positive rate. And I think what you just laid out is if that's what my, quote, intelligence is feeding me, if that's my detection, I can't possibly take an action on that. There's just no way. But if you flip that around, if I start getting to the place where every time I get something from that, call it a confirmation, call it whatever, 96% confident, 98% confident, then I could start to block things. Recognizing, of course, that if you take your main server offline at the end of the quarter, you might have some people that you got to talk to. But I always think that's an interesting thing to look at. And it comes down to confidence. All right, let's talk about action, right? Because that's really what we want to be able to do here. First thing we talked about is, all right, why? Why act at all? And I think it's interesting because my sense is you didn't really get a ton of a choice. I can't imagine a president calling on you and you say, "No, I'm busy. I've got a taco here. Thanks." So how about the rest of us? I mean, why do we need to take action? With all the stuff that we've talked about here, and there's a lot, what do we need to think about?
Yeah, sure. So many reasons. Why do you need to take action? I mean, first of all, it's your job, right? If you're a cybersecurity professional, that's what you're hired to do. Got to do your job. Better to give it a shot, rather than fail. But like I said up front, there's a lot of higher stakes here than there used to be. Court cases and lawsuits are a big deal. So I think there's a couple dozen lawsuits against these big companies like Target and Home Depot. And it's coming up at the executives in charge. It's coming against the board members, of course, right at the companies, for failing to meet the standard of care, right? Failing to meet minimum cybersecurity standards to protect themselves, or at least that's what the lawsuits claim. I mean, this is a whole different level of trouble and cost to the company. So the other reason, which is what drives me most of my career, is just we got to stop the bad guys, right?
Yep.
These bad guys, whether they're organized crime or miscreants or activists or other people, they're not doing the right thing here. They're breaking the law, they're causing damage, and I feel like it's a part of our responsibility to stop them, to defend the innocent people from these bad guys. And when you talk about these bad guys, they're often not discerning. They're not often going right after you. Now, if you personally upset them, then maybe they're coming after you. But in most cases, you're just trying to make money, and they're going to go for the weaker target. So you just need to up your game a step or two to avoid being a target. Now, they'll just go to the next house, right, and rob that house, and then they'll up their game. And that's how you increase the cost on the bad guys. Now,
yeah, and that's an interesting thing too, right? Because one of the things, and I want to just kind of circle back on it's your job, because you've had some really fantastic exposure to where. Well, let me ask this slightly differently, with at least what's kind of rolling through my head. We need to do better than the next guy, but at the same time, we want the next guy to do better too. So when we talk about us stepping up and taking action, how much of this is by ourselves and how much of this is collectively?
This is a great question. And, there's been a national debate for years about how companies should work together in cyber defense and how companies and the government should work together for cyber defense. And I'll tell you, the jury's still out. The U.S. Congress has yet to pass the definitive legislation that explains exactly how companies can work together and exactly how the companies and the government can work together. For example, to share information about attacks and defenses. So at the moment, most companies are on their own. There are some information sharing groups out there. There's the more informal info sharing, that friends and allies do to defend themselves. But I think the jury's out on exactly what's going to be decided to be legal as far as, common defense. In the meantime, you're on your own. And I think all you can do is up your game. Get on a plan to continue upping your game a notch at a time.
I think it's a good point. Yeah, and I always, it's one of those things where the more you share, the better it is for everybody else, but the more you potentially put yourself at risk, or the more you open yourself up to legal action. So I'm glad you brought that up, just because I think, to your point, with some limited exceptions, especially organized crime, which is probably the ones that we need to spend the most concern about, they don't care. It's almost like high stakes smash and grab now, although I'm not sure the stakes are that high. High tech maybe, and they're coming after the stuff that they can get, and they'll get it where they can, and they'll get it where they need to go. All right, so let's think about plans of action. So part of the goal here, this whole series, and I love what you've offered here. So I just want to kind of frame this a little bit. What we've talked about so far is, okay, you need a plan of action, and that plan of action needs to get you buy-in. You need buy-in from the other parts of the business. You need buy-in from the executives. You might need buy-in from the board. Fran suggested that boards are security aware, and if they're not, well, maybe you need to look for a different job, because you should get one where the board is security aware. So when I asked you, what do I need to do about this? What's my plan of action? You had some really good thoughts here based on some of your experience. So what should we think about? What's kind of one thing? I mean, there's some steps in here we can roll out over the next couple of days, but how do you see us getting that level of recognition and dialogue that we need in order to truly move forward? What should we do?
Yeah, this is a good question. A lot of security people I know, unfortunately, struggle to get their executives, as interested as necessary to give them funding and support within the corporation to make changes, right? And I feel for my security friends. They have the right case, they have the right intentions, but their bosses are busy and they need to get their attention. I find that the number one way to get executives' attention is to get some good information about what's actually happening in the company. Just good quality info about how you're being attacked, you, the company, and bring it to your bosses. So information about actual known weaknesses in your company defenses, or actual attacks on your company, or actual, penetrations of the company that are ongoing at the moment. Any good information about the real state of cyber defense of your company. This is intelligence, basically. What I'm saying is, get all this data, package it together into essentially an intelligence briefing, and then share it with the bosses, just like the President's morning briefing I mentioned before. Now, the key is you've got to present this as facts. You've got to present this, in a neutral point of view, not immediately use it to get what you want, get more funding or get more staff or more power within the organization, because then it makes the intelligence look like you're just spinning it for your personal benefit. You need to present it just from a neutral point of view. Hey, boss, here's the information. Now, a lot of people say, what if you don't have this information? Well, then go get it. If you're a cyber defender, your job is to get this info. So if you don't have some good info, go find some promising technology and plug it in and find some intelligence. There's plenty of technology in the market that purports to give you this kind of quality information. Some is better than others. You got to go find the good stuff, plug it in. Call vendors, start a POC, see what happens. And then schedule this intelligence briefing with your boss or with the boss's boss. Now, I've found that when you say, hey, boss, I've got some important intelligence on our company's defenses, I need to share it with you. you have a much higher chance of getting on their calendar quickly than otherwise, because this information is timely, right? It's fresh. And the executives want to know this information. It sounds compelling. So I find that that's a good way to get on their calendar.
How often would you try to be on their calendar? I mean, you know, the president the president gets a daily update. I'm guessing CEO and executives of a company don't need a daily update.
Yeah,
what would you say is a good start?
I don't think I have a number here. I think this is up to the way your company operates, right? Whatever time you think you can get. I think daily is probably too much. I don't think your defensive landscape changes on a daily basis to the level of having to give your boss a new update. But it could be weekly, monthly, quarterly. Obviously, boards don't meet very often. You're not going to get to them probably more frequently than quarterly. But your boss, or maybe his boss, you could get to more frequently. I would answer that by saying, how quickly is the attack landscape changing, right? When there's material changes in the intelligence briefing and you got enough new information to make it worth it, I think then you go do it.
Let me ask another.
Frequency so much as just doing it the first couple times to get their attention that this is a big deal.
Okay, and look, I want to just underscore your point, and I think you've made it really well, but I just want to emphasize it again. It's neutral, and I think that's the big difference. I see folks in the wake of a breach, they want to go, oh, see, I told you so. This is what I've been telling. And what you're suggesting is actually the exact opposite. I'm going to give you the information that you need to understand this better. There's something in here, too, that I think Fran talked about. So if people didn't get a chance to listen to what he said, you know, sometimes it's not easy to present this information to the CEO. And sometimes the CEO or the other executives don't want to hear it because you're coming to them and saying, we have a weakness. We have a spot where someone could attack us. Now, how do you steal somebody and steal up their opportunity? Because I don't want somebody to feel like, well, that's just going to make it look like I didn't do my job. How do you thread that needle, right? So you want it to be useful. You want it to be neutral. It needs to be pretty candid about the state of things as they are. Do you run the risk then of somebody saying, well, why didn't you fix that? That you should have fixed that? Or how do you approach it so that it's what they need to know, whether they really are excited about it or not?
This is a real issue, and I'm glad you raised it. So, you know, there's a couple of ways you can get around it. You can't completely solve that problem, right? If you're the guy presenting the intelligence and you're the guy in charge of solving it. So one option is just to separate those two people. In some organizations, the people who present the intelligence are different from the people who do the defense, right? Many government organizations. Now, this requires a pretty big company if you have two separate teams. But one option is just to have different people provide the data than are in charge of defending it, right? So at least you don't feel that personal sense of conflict. I think another option is just to talk about the threats, right? So whereas the weaknesses in your company, you know, are your responsibility, the threats out there are not exactly your responsibility, right? If a new actor comes with a new type of malware or a new way of attacking you, it's not your fault, right? Now you need to keep up with them and keep your defenses up. That's your part of the job. So the half of the intelligence briefing that's about the bad guys and what they're trying to do, you can't really be blamed for. I think the other half of the briefing that's about your vulnerabilities and your weaknesses, you know, that's your job. Now, if you start doing this from the beginning of your job, obviously, you get the senior's attention quickly and you start working on it. And you present a plan on how you're going to close up the defenses. But I hear you. Some people are not going to want to present the bad news. I think you just have to do it. It's your job. You got to give your bosses a clear picture of the risk in their own company. You know, that's part of what you have to do.
You know, and look, I think you just shared two fantastic pieces of advice. And as part of that, too, and this, again, Fran had some of the suggestions, don't start with the gap. Don't say, okay, well, we got a weakness here, here, and here, you know, and with this impression of, so I probably screwed up, and, you know, as you gaze to the floor, aw, shucks. No, what you're saying is, look, let me go explain to you what we're seeing. Let me show you what's happening out there, and let me tell you where they could potentially take that to us. And we're going to do something about it. But I'd like you to, you know, I'd like you to be aware of it. So, all right, so let's talk then about what we should present. All right, so we're going to go gather some information. And to me, this feels like a really great one-day, next-week exercise. Use the tools you've got. Use the relationships you've got with vendors. You want something that's relative to you, your company. So what am I going to present? What do I need to think about as I'm building an intelligence briefing?
Yeah, exactly. Like you say, this is something you can do in a week. right? Use your current tech or try new technology, find good intelligence about what's happening, present it to your bosses. Get on the calendar and make a good presentation. That can happen in days, right? So I think that intelligence briefings have to have these two categories I just mentioned. One is information about the threats, who is trying to attack us, right? Who is motivated to attack us based on our company's, presence in the world, who's interested, who's trying, just the general categories, right? People who are trying to steal large numbers of credit card numbers are trying to get us, or people from Eastern Europe where we have some business issues that are difficult are trying to get us, etc. What are they doing? What's their motivation? How do they do it? Just paint the picture for your boss, right? This is who and why. And, the news is important, the things you read about in the press, but I don't want to overly focus on what you read about in the news, right? This is more about actually assessing who is out there and how are they going to attack us. So that's the threat actor side. I find that executives are really interested in this. I think they should be more interested in vulnerabilities, which I'll get to in a minute, but they really like to know who is coming at them and why. That's interesting for them. That really hooks them. The second part of the intelligence briefing should be really your own vulnerabilities. What parts of our network are weak? What assets in our company are most important to protect, right? And if we don't know the answer to that, we need to get on it and do the assessment and figure it out and bring some focus to really what's important to protect. Now, this kind of cyber assets are not on the balance sheet. So sometimes executives don't think of your data or a database or a network as an asset, but it is. It's a key part of modern companies, and you need to know where you're strong and where you're weak. So I think an intelligence briefing should have part one, threat actors, part two, vulnerabilities in our system.
Do you see this as the kind of thing then that can grow? I mean, I can see where I can pull something together real quick in a week. I can come in, if I do a little bit of homework and practice, I can probably weave a pretty good story and a pretty candid one, right? I'm not going to talk about some foreign national company, or country trying to get retribution. We're probably going to focus, unless it doesn't fit your company, we're going to focus more on the cybercrime and the opportunistic nature. If I was in retail, I'm pretty sure I'd be focusing on point-of-sale systems. We'll get into the vulnerabilities. I kind of see two challenges. I'm just kind of curious if you see this as an incremental type of thing. There's what I think I know today, and then there's also, and what I really think about is the assets, because I think you're dead on. We need to say, and these are the assets we need to protect. And man, remarkable to think about the fact that it's probably not normally on the balance sheet. A lot of security organizations struggle with really knowing where the assets are of the organization, because it's not like we walk around with these little stickers that say this is really important and this is really important and this is really important. So do you use this briefing then to say, here's what we know today, and gosh, I'd like to get better information, right? So it's not using it for enterprise building and kingdom building, but basically saying, even we might have some gaps in our intelligence, and I'd like to go shore those up to get you a better picture. How do you handle if the picture isn't as complete as you'd like it to be?
Yeah, Michael, you're right on. The first intelligence briefing you give, it's not going to be that great, right? You're going to, if you're being honest, tell the bosses about all these unsure things you have, uncertainties, right? Well, I'm not sure exactly which are our most important assets, right? I'm not sure exactly where our biggest vulnerabilities are. I'm not totally sure of the patch state, right? Which OSs we're using for every machine, and that's often collaboration, long-term collaboration with IT and other parts of the organization to get that information. So I think it's very clear to the bosses from the first briefing, you don't know everything, and that you and they are going to want better quality information in the future. So yeah, you're right on. You're both going to want to improve the intelligence briefings over time so you can do the right thing in defense. And I think you want to lay out for the bosses a plan, right, about how you can get better information.
I like that. Now, when you did these briefings, how often did you find that not just the president and senior staff, but other people, when you do a briefing, do you get a lot of questions from it? I mean, is this the kind of thing that, are we looking at 15 minutes? Are we looking at a half hour? Is this an hour? What was your experience? I know it varies, but just what do we think? What's our mindset as we're going into this?
I'm thinking 15 minutes, super short and sweet. After the first one, I think is different, right? The first one might be a whole hour or maybe 2 hours, because you need to explain the vocabulary sometimes, right? Explain what assets are, explain how organized crime groups are operating, depending on how savvy your boss is, who they are. Sometimes cybersecurity is within a risk or financial or general counsel organization, not as tech savvy, right? Sometimes you need to spend that first meeting just getting them up to speed. But after that, I think it's just 15 minutes so that it's easy to schedule. It's just the information, and you have separate meetings about defensive spend and new technology you want to buy, right? Because you don't want to politicize your intelligence, right? You don't want to seem like you're just putting that information out there in order to build your empire. I think you've got to do that too, but that's a separate meeting where you ask for more. I think this is a 15-minute brief. Yep, nice and short and sweet, and I think the bosses will expect it to improve over time. They'll expect you to get better and better information so you can aim your defensive spending accordingly.
I love the idea of separating it out, because I think a lot of people go, well, wait a minute, if I've got a chance, if I've got time with them, I want to try to do everything. Oh, there's so much they need to know. And what we're really saying is, no, you got 15 minutes, give them 15 minutes of stuff. Let them know if anything has changed or what they need to know about that's changed. Let them understand where the connection points are. And if there's anything that really needs to bubble it up. Otherwise, keep them abreast of it on whatever periodic schedule makes sense. Then, if there's things that need to happen on it, see if they go, well, let's deal with that. Say, I'd love to. Let's schedule some time. I want to bring the right people into the meeting. I want to get you the right framework or whatever it is. And those are the things that I think really make it better for us. But what's great about this is, especially, and I just want to emphasize, it's okay not to know. I think a lot of times in security, a lot of us got started. When I got my start, my boss put his arm around me and says, well, let me explain how it's going to go. When you do a good job, no one's going to pay attention. And when you screw up, it's going to come down on top of your head. And so in security, we're always afraid of getting it wrong. But what you're saying is, I got to be able to stand up and say, I don't know. And you got to get comfortable with that. Is that something you were naturally comfortable with, or did you have to kind of do it a couple times and realize the world didn't end?
I mean, you got to say you don't know, because just look at the news, right? These big companies with very capable defensive teams are getting hit hard. Like the military, with a lot of people trying really hard to protect themselves, are getting hit hard. So you've got to be honest and say what you know and what you don't know, right? That's just, I think, the way you got to operate. I think when you separate that intelligence briefing from the defense briefing, it helps you, right? It's easier to say, here are the facts, and not get into the discussion about did we screw it up, right? Who didn't do something? How much do we have to spend to fix it? Separate the two mentally, I find, can help. It's also different people you need in the meeting. The intelligence briefing is just a cyber security ops type person presenting info. The defense briefing is it's procurement people, right? It's finance people, budgeting people, IT guys with how we'll roll it out, lawyers for contracts or POCs. So I find that meeting is a different meeting, right? I like to separate these two.
I love it. I love that thought. And I want to point out, if somebody with your stature and level of success says, you got to be able to say you don't know, and you face some pretty powerful people with the ability to say, I don't know, I'm going to go ahead and guess you probably followed up with, but I can get you an answer, right, if they wanted one.
Yeah, I mean, you just need to show improvement, right? If you don't know today, you better have something more useful later. That's what you're there for. So I think it's okay in the beginning to say what you don't know, and then improve. In cyber defense, we're looking for improvement, right? There's no perfect defense. You just want to keep marching up and doing a better and better job. That's the game.
I love that. I think that's what a great idea. And so as we're looking at that, over the next day, so here's what I'd say. Let me break it up this way, because I want to get some of your thoughts on leading this change. So things I would look at in the next day. What information do you have? How could you calibrate a briefing? What do you not know? Right. So if we look at this plan of what can you do internally for yourself, think about putting together an intelligence briefing. What would you need to share? Have you ever done it? What questions have you fielded? And how do you get on somebody's calendar to do that? And then you got about a week, maybe 2 weeks this year, but you got about a week to go gather whatever information you can with whatever tools you've got to present something that's neutral. And I think Samir laid it out well. That first one might take an hour or so. You might need to do a couple more frequently in the beginning so that people kind of get on pace with it. And then as everybody understands it, you're good to go. And then over the next 30 days, that's a great time to go look at some of these tools, to bring stuff in. Because what I like about this as I'm processing it is, you've just given me and everybody else this fantastic way to start the dialogue that's just based on, let me give you better intelligence because you're going to need to make better decisions. I'm not going to tell you how to decide. I'm not going to tell you what to do. I've got a separate briefing for that. We got a separate approach for that. But let me just tell you what you need to know. And instinctively, that's going to lead to some questions and some of these follow-ons, that's going to get you the support that you need. And if you've been with us for this whole series, this is a theme now you've heard from several high-profile, successful people. You've got to be willing to say, I'm not really sure. I can go get an answer. These are the things we got to know. These are the things we're going to measure. Here's how we're going to do it, and I'm going to report back periodically. I think that's really powerful. So, Samir, as we kind of wrap this up today, but also the series, what are some things you would think about in terms of the rewards for leading this change? What do I need to do to be successful as a leader making this pivot?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I've got a few pieces of advice here. I think there's a lot of good advice out there, but I'll give you the couple things that matter to me. So just first of all, before I even dive in, you just got to do it. I think I've mentioned this a few times, right? It's your job. Don't put it off. You know, dig in and get the job done. So there's nothing, you know, what do the motivational speakers say, right? Like, it's never a better day than today to start.
That's right.
My first main point here would be to be technically driven. So I've seen, unfortunately, some companies and buyers focus on brand names, right, or focus on pricing and other things. I'm a technologist by training, and to me, it's all about the best technology. And I've seen the best companies really have the best technology. So I think it's all about getting products and actually trying them on your network and seeing whether they work or not, and picking the best stuff. I think it's worth paying for the best stuff. So maybe it's stating the obvious here, but go find the best tech that works for you and use it. That's point one.
No, you know, let me ask then. I feel like the same approach applies when you're making an intelligence briefing. If there's something you don't know, the strength is in saying, I don't really understand how that works. I don't really, explain to me your technology and make that investment. And the reason I'm making that point is I still see a lot of people in our industry that, oh, yeah, I heard of that one time. And we kind of nod and we smile and we go, oh, yeah, I like it. And you know, it's a little bit what you said, I guess. It's substituting that brand name into something. But what I almost feel like is if you want to get the best performing technology, there may be somebody out there who figures something out you don't know yet. This is a great opportunity. But you're going to learn more if you say, I don't really understand how that works. Help me understand. Educate me so I'm a better person in the process. Does that fit under what you're talking about?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I'm a guy who wants to try all the new technology, right? New phones, new devices. And I think as a cyber defender, you want to try the new technology out there. Sometimes big companies have the best technology. Sometimes it's coming out of startups you never heard of. But just try it out. Find what works best and use it. Be technically driven instead of driven by other things.
Yep,
That's
I love
point one. Second point I often repeat to people is just to test yourself constantly. You know, we call this red teaming, right, or penetration testing, pen testing. So an example is, you know, like I mentioned airport security before, you know, you have to periodically have a federal agent take a gun through the metal detector, right, to make sure those X-ray scanner people can actually see it. You just got to test yourself all the time so they don't get complacent. And so in cyber, I think you want to hire professional red team companies or maybe have your own internal penetration testing company and have them really try to hit your network just to find out where the weaknesses are. And you'll constantly get new information about weaknesses, right, as your network and defenses are changing all the time. And you want to always improve there. I recommend quarterly red teaming a few times a year as a pretty good periodicity, just to constantly test yourself and get fresh information about where you're good and bad at defense.
Yeah, you know, I think there's an interesting thing there too. One, that feels naturally like it fits into the intelligence briefing you're going to do. But the second thing is, again, I didn't hear you say, do red teaming to prove how awesome you are. What I heard was, do red teaming to learn what you don't know yet. Well, to me, it's the difference between a test and a rehearsal. If I tell you you're going to be tested, then instinctively, well, what do I got to do to be perfect? But if I tell you it's a rehearsal, you're allowed to get a screw up. And so again, what you're saying is if you're testing yourself, you're not testing yourself to prove to the world that you're the champ. You're testing yourself to figure out what you didn't know yesterday, that you better be prepared for tomorrow. And that just that subtle mind shift, I think, is going to give you that big difference so that when you go get that briefing, it's not, well, we did a test and let me tell you how we failed. Hey, we did a test and let me tell you what I found out before an adversary found out. Right?
That's exactly right. It is a key mindset that you have to do this well. And I think the bosses should expect that you're constantly testing yourself, right? Then when you do say you've actually defended something pretty well, they will believe you, right? They'll know you're credible because you're constantly testing yourself. I think building that credibility here is the key enabler for everything else you want to do in defense. my third point here, and then I'll stop, would just be to build a coalition. This is more kind of organizational psychology. Having worked in lots of big organizations in the government and other places, you need to build a coalition to get anything done. I think too often people try to do everything on their own, right? And you need to build the connections across your organization. So I mentioned earlier, right, you're going to need people who have intelligence, so, you know, cybersecurity people, IT people. You're going to need procurement people to help buy new technology, lawyers to sign the contracts, right, technical leads and product managers to deploy it. You're going to need CFO and budget people to find the money to actually let you buy things. You're going to need HR to hire a team to do all this. But you need so many people in your organization to actually come together to make change like this. You can't do it on your own. So I recommend, you know, branching out and making connections with some of those non-technical people in your organization and bring them together and say, hey, this is a big thing we're going to do together, right? We're going to improve the defense of this company. I need you to do this, I need you to do this, and get everyone excited about it. I think the first step to get people excited, I think, is to invite them to see your intelligence briefing. Either join the briefing you're giving to your boss or just give them a preview on their own. Everyone wants to see an intelligence briefing, right? And it's a good thing to show them, hey, these are the problems we really face. This is the raw info that I have. Let's all work together to solve it. So I think building a coalition within an organization is a key way to succeed here.
Without a doubt, Samir, this is a super powerful approach, and even just that, I'm thinking about if you invite somebody to an intelligence briefing, and you're asking them, hey, like, I'll give you 15 minutes. I can't think of a person who wouldn't want to be part of that. And if you're not editorializing and using it for politics, as you've emphasized now multiple times, if I say, hey, we're going to do an intelligence briefing and we're going to share, we're going to tell you what we know, and we're going to put it out there. Man, doesn't that just invite people to come and to contribute other stuff and to contribute their suggestions and to want to be part of it? I think it's an absolutely fantastic idea. And what I love about it more is when you talk about building a coalition, and in fact, we can't do it all by ourselves. Yeah, and so when we sit around and go, oh, there's not enough people, we can't do it all. You don't have to. And what you just gave us was a brilliant way to start to get people involved. And all I'll say is if we take the time to go back through all of the other things that we've talked about, we've laid out the pieces for the story. We've laid out the things that you can measure and calculate quickly the next couple of days, and the ways to start to have these conversations, the questions to ask. I think the key sometimes is to shut up and listen. Let somebody tell you what they think, and then weigh it, right, and spend some time with it. So this is phenomenal, and I really appreciate you taking the time, Samir, with us today. Let me just wrap up here real quick. We've come to the end of not only today's conversation, but to the series. It's been phenomenal for me. I have taken away pages of notes from each of these, which of course aids in my ability to write up the reflection. But what I hope has happened as you've joined us and listened into each of these conversations, as you've read and reflected on the different content and the stuff that we've been able to share, is how has that impacted you? What did you take away from it? Was there something that was new, something that was different, something that you had seen before but hadn't considered? Because there's a lot of stuff here that, you know, we put a lot of effort into building this, and even now, today I'm sitting here totally jazzed up, totally excited, you know, can't wait to see some of these briefings and what that looks like and what that leads to. So as we close the series is going to remain as part of Damballa University. It is accessible to you. And please take advantage of it. Take advantage of these opportunities. Use it to improve yourself and your practice. I'm grateful to Damballa for hosting this and bringing in some of these absolutely fantastic guests. And as Samir said, you know, get a proof of concept. I think, in my experience, you'll be benefited if you were to check out Damballa as part of that. And I think you'll see why when you get a chance to play with that technology and see what it can actually do for you. So phenomenal way to wrap up a pretty awesome series. So thanks, everyone. Thanks for participating. I hope this gets you where you need to be. Mark, thanks for the opportunity, and back to you.